He has risen. This is Blackest recap ever. I haven't done a recap in a really long time. And I realize it's because I haven't watched anything on TV that I really wanted to watch. Anyway, I just saw Lifetime's biopic of the Clark sisters. And I am Dr. Maddie Moss Clark fresh. These are my mother's glasses, and these shits are strong as hell. Speaking of my mother, she hasn't watched it yet. She's watching it today, and I'm really pissed off with her about it because there's a lot of historical reference points specifically about black music that I would have liked for her to be a part of. But anyway, and that's something my mother is really excellent in the reference component and musical reference points and historical reference points with black music, especially in the 70s and 80s. Thanks a lot, Ma. Anyway, I'm going to give this movie a B+. And why am I giving it a B+? That's pretty damn high for Lifetime, especially when it comes to black biopics, because they did Whitney Houston wrong. They did Aaliyah so wrong. And this picture, the casting was impeccable. The screenplay was impeccable. The costumes were impeccable. And of course, the music was impeccable. And also the story in itself was not something that I thought was so outlandish and just, it couldn't have happened. It was a lot of the colloquialisms, Black American colloquialisms, we identify with a lot of the dynamics of Black mother and daughter relationships, the dynamics of sisters, of family, the Black church. All of those things were covered, and they were covered so well. So whoever also consulted on this did a good job. And may I also say that with the Clark sisters probably consulting on this, there was no one got a more elaborate treatment from the story. It was from my perspective. Of course, I'm not the siblings. I'm not Niecy. I'm not Twinkie, who, their story wasn't necessarily highlighted in extremely positive component. But I do feel as though the story in itself was handled very, very well. I didn't look at it and say, get out, this person is so horrible, or this person was it was all rainbows and violins and everything like that. Even down to when they covered Karen's gastric bypass, it was referenced when she says, listen, I'm doing this for myself, which we really like. Now get into the aspect of, I want to highlight that, Dr. Maddie Moss Clark is not as well known in the music industry in general. She's very well known in Black gospel, right? And I want to say that they gave her her due and her just due last night. They covered a woman who left a legacy, a musical dynasty. Shout out to the city of Detroit. Detroit is a huge city that has been going through, unfortunately quite a lot. But Detroit is one of the cities that were massive in the component of Black culture post Great Migration. And if you look up Great Migration, because I'm not here to give you a history lesson, I think that everyone should know it. It is not something that is covered as well. If anything, it is usually mocked, but that's a whole other story. And so anyone who listens to music from any R&B, especially female singer that came out in the late 80s to say the mid 90s, your Mary J. Blige's, your Faith Evans, even when you listen to Escape, Brownstone, it's a heavy Clark sisters influence. And that influence in regards to that 3-part harmony component that you see in gospel and those runs and those riffs, amazingly done by church women. Okay. And another thing that's highlighted in this movie is the patriarchy that you see in the Black church. This woman was powerful and dynamic. And even when you're powerful and dynamic and successful, the male ego is a dangerous thing. Dr. Maddie Moss Clark was a 2-time divorcee. 2-time. By the way, I'm in my Dr. Maddie Moss Clark cosplay. I've been interchanging outfits ever since last night. I got a ton of hats. These are my mother's glasses. I got some clip-ons because a good saint does not defile her body with piercings or tattoos. So these is clip-ons. Okay, and you got to have you a nice brooch. If you're not a lady if you don't have a nice brooch. All right. Back to the Clark sisters and how powerful and dynamic and influential they are in Black music. So I had a conversation with my mom a little bit earlier this morning, and we were talking about Clark sisters having a gospel background. They were one of the first Black gospel artists to chart and chart high on Billboard. And they were one of the first Black gospel artists that were played on WBLS. Now, WBLS is an integral part of Black music in that it was the first FM station to play Black music. Before that, my mother said you had to go on the AM side to hear your favorite Black artists. And we're not talking about very popular artists. You remember when you used to watch MTV and the 3 Black artists that you would see up there was Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson, and Prince. If you wanted to see, say, a Shaka Khan, or if you wanted to see Anita Baker, you were not going to catch those artists on MTV. And then that's when BET came out, and you got every artist that it was your favorite that we like to call Black famous, in a difference than white famous. That is then where BLS would, outbreak artists. If it wasn't for BLS, I don't know where the hell they would play Jaheim, right? Back to the movie. Can we talk about the costumes? Oh, wait, no. Angelou Ellis, who played Dr. Maddie Moss Clark, you did an impeccable job. Woman, you encompassed the Black mother without the stereotypes. I don't know. There's not a lot of footage of this woman, but I feel like you grasp her mannerisms. If you've ever been into a Black church, there's a lot of components. We pass down a lot of behaviors and terminologies and sternness. And she did an impeccable job. Angelou Ellis, bravo, sister, bravo. And she's from Mississippi, so she probably referenced tons and tons of aunts and all of her Black female family members to get into that role. And she really encompass it like no other. Kiki shared, you did an amazing job as your mom, as you should have. And girl, you took me to church when you did those riffs and those runs. And that's another thing. Riffs and runs were not something that you saw a lot of in Black music previous to that. It would be these breathy ballads. When it came into that component of pulling the using the voice as an instrument and changing interludes so quickly and so easily with breath control, again, thank you, Dr. Maddie Moss Clark, because you made your daughters give us that. And now you can't turn on a gospel song or you can't turn on an R&B song without long streaming riffs and runs. Some people in the church call them Googles, but you'll see it where someone is just constantly doing taking one note and just running with it. It was a really great historical reference point. The costumes. Listen, whoever did the costumes to this, I looked her up, and apologies I didn't keep her name as a reference point. You did a great job. You embodied the year. I mean, the clothing looked great. It was like vintage porn. Only thing that I do wish that they would have kept up with, and this is not to costumes, but it was to hair, especially Detroit hairstyles in the 90s. Detroit was a huge influence in Black hairstyles in the 90s. You couldn't go nowhere without the freeze curls, without the big high hair. Google finally Karen, which is Karen Clark shares one of the most successful Clark sisters, a huge influence of Faith Evans. And you know how big of a Faith Evans fan I am. Google her album cover and you look at all that hair and you just laugh at it. It's kind of like a throwback. And in times like this with this pandemic, it was a good watch. And you watched, I was on Twitter and I had made mention on Twitter that I want to give a shout out to all my play cousins and my play aunties that allotted me all this really great content. Black Twitter is just so it cannot be played with in regards to the wittiness, the highlight of Black culture. Black is not a monolith, but a lot of times when you are referencing certain aspects of Black culture, a lot of it is Black American culture, and a lot of it is integral to part of the Great Migration. So it's Black people from the South coming to the North, utilizing certain cultures that they learned in the South, and then also dealing with integration, racism in the North and in these northern cities. Your Detroits, your Oaklands, your New York, Philly, DC, all of those cities, huge Black populations. The explosion came post-migration. Back to the movie. You, the costume designer, I'm still sticking on this. You did your thing with full bodies. You weren't working with no size 4 skinny Hollywood types. You did your job, and you did an impeccable job, and you had them fly to the T. You can't even mess with that. I heard that Donald Lawrence was the musical supervisor on this. Again, bravo, bravo. And may I just also say, shade, no shade. I'm really happy that Tyler Perry had nothing to do with this, because the professionalism and the visual elements were great. Who did have something to do with it, all right, the trifecta of sisterhood, Queen Latifah, Missy Misdemeanor Elliott, and Mary J. Blige were the executive producers. And listen, I mean, just like, it is phenomenal. This has been a rough year, okay? This has been a rough year, and to see that body of work came to us, and they did the Clark sisters so much justice. It brought tears to my eyes, knowing that they were behind that, and that was just an amazing aspect. What else was really great about it? I think highlighting about Twinkie selling her publishing rights for a car. We forget that in the music industry, Black people create a lot of really great content, but we don't necessarily make money off of that content, right? Our publishing is sold. We don't necessarily have ownership of our rights and our masters. And they highlighted that this has been going on from the dawn of time. So in recent news with Meg Thee Stallion complaining about her contract, it just goes to show you that the repetitious components have been happening time and time again. Showing you the Black church, which has been getting a lot of backlash recently with the pandemic, and people are still trying to have events, and they shouldn't be having events, knowing that general assembly of people is creating the spread of this pandemic. But that's a whole other story about critical thinking and defiance, and ownership of people's thoughts and minds. But all in all, I will get back to the aspect that Lifetime, you did your thing with the Clark sisters biopic. I'm looking at y'all a little sideways with the up and coming Salt and Pepper one. I don't know. I'm gonna watch it for entertainment, but I don't know if I'm going to have the same sort of reaction that I had to the Clark sisters. And this was a film that I feel like that Lifetime really took a risk on, because when we really talk about Black famous, like Clark sisters are Black church famous. If you're not church going folk, you're not as familiar with it. This is I always say, and this is the last thing I'm going to say before we step away from this. This kind of separated on my timeline. People were watching RZA and DJ Premier because they're hip hop heads. But then on my timeline, there were a lot of people watching the Clark sisters biopic. And then I bet you they had people, some of my other friends were like, what the hell is this? And how is this relevant? But the Clark sisters and are a huge, valid component to Black music, and they did them justice. I think it was a great body of work, and thank you very much, Lifetime. We needed this during this pandemic, during this quarantine. This was definitely needed. So yeah, I'm gonna get out of my Dr. Maddie Mae Moss Clark cosplay and get ready to make Easter Sunday dinner, and I hope you all stay home, stay safe, and I may do a few more recaps. I don't know, I gotta watch something. We're not even gonna talk about my TV habits. All right, he has risen.